And welcome into Poke the Bear, episode 110. I'm Evan Marinofsky. That is Conor Ryan. Conor, how you doing?
Evan, I'm doing well. How you doing?
Doing great. Doing great. I have moved. As you can see, the backdrop behind me is different. I have not moved into Warrior Ice Arena, although some could say maybe, but I have not moved into Warrior Ice Arena. So unlike the people on Twitter who were like, Evan's living at Warrior this summer, which cold place in hot weather. You can't hate that. So
nobody beats that.
Nobody beats that. Nobody does beat that. But it's funny, Conor, because even though it's the end of August and you wouldn't think there's a lot of Bruins stuff to talk about, right? And we said this on Monday, right? There wasn't a ton. Well, there's been a lot in the past 2 or 3 days for any time of year, but also for August. So it's interesting. Get this David Pastrnak news. And I will read the tweet because I have it up on my phone now from a Twitter account called Andy and Rono. They're a hockey stats Twitter. Tweeted on the 23rd, which was on Tuesday. The Boston Bruins would like to re-sign David Pastrnak this offseason already, but according to our source, Pastrnak is in no rush to sign an extension. Not so good news for Boston. It looks like he wants to know if the Bruins still will have a chance to win the Stanley Cup in those next years when Bergeron and Krejci retire. We'll get to that in a bit. He wants a Stanley Cup so bad. It's his goal. Don't get us wrong. He still prefers to stay in Boston. He loves the city, but nothing is sure right now. Maybe we'll see Stamkos/Gaudreau situation again or something like that next summer. So Stamkos he re-signed, right? It was like contentious.
Day of free agency. Everyone was like, oh my God, he's going to hit the market. And then I think 30 minutes into free agency, he ended up signing a long term. But if you're a Lightning fan at that time, I'm sure it did not feel very, very fun thinking that he's going to go to market and sign somewhere else. So
not great. So this news with Pastrnak is interesting because he's in no rush to sign. I still think he signs. I do. But what's your reaction to this?
Yeah, it's. I think if you're a Bruins fan, it does not feel great because I think when we've had this discussion before in terms of Pastrnak and what the end game is going to be there, and I think I agree with you, Evan, that I think he eventually does sign. I think right now you're in this spot where the Bruins are having discussions with his representatives, but until Pastrnak gets back over to the States ahead of training camp, you really can't make some significant progress there. So I imagine once he gets back, they'll hash those things out. And I think even as was referenced in those tweets from Andy and Rono, I think there's a lot working in the Bruins' favor here in terms of getting Pastrnak to buy in terms of, I don't think money is necessarily going to be the biggest impediment. He's going to get paid. I think we all agree that. But I would not surprise him if he signs below maybe what the market value is in terms of, I don't know, 9.5. So, but I also think the Bruins are willing to pay whatever it is to keep him. He's a guy that loves playing in Boston. I think he's comfortable in this market. He's a guy that even though he's getting a little bit older, I think he's embraced the fact that he's part of that kind of new leadership group. He's a guy that takes a lot of pride in having the A on his sweater at times last season, and he wants to build that part of his game up. I think the only issue, and I think the thing that could really derail the whole thing, it's something that I think if you're a Bruins fan who's been just following the team, it's like, well, does David Pastrnak want to be here beyond the post-Bergeron and Krejci era, right? And that's a thing where I think it's in the back of your mind. You're like, I hope that's not the biggest hurdle they have to clear. And now you're kind of hearing it from other sources. And you're like, all right, yeah, this is going to be, I think, the biggest concern. Because for David Pastrnak, he's accomplished quite a bit. Whoever he plays for next season, he's going to get paid. He doesn't have to worry about money, doesn't have to worry about any of those things. He's shared the Rocket Richard with Ovechkin that 1 year. He's going to hit 50 goals at some point, star player in this league. One thing he doesn't have is Stanley Cup. And it's something that means a whole lot to him. If you're, him and you have this leverage in terms of what you need to do to get this new contract and where you want to go. If you want to stay in Boston, you better get some assurances that he's part of this next wave and they have a 2, 3, 4, 5 year plan, right? Because we know what their plan is for this year. They're going to be trying to run back and, have one last kick at the can. But what happens in 2024, 25, when Pasternak's 28, 29 in the prime of his career and you're scuffling in the standings? You have Detroit and Ottawa ahead of you in the Atlantic. You've got a pipeline of prospects that aren't really hitting at the same level as other teams that are, getting an influx of young talent. If you're David Pastrnak, you don't want to waste away those years. So if I'm him and I'm his representatives, you have to hash that with the Bruins of, right, I know we can't really look into a crystal ball, but there better be at least some set plan for how they're gonna, map this out in the years ahead. Because I think that's the biggest hurdle for him.
Well, this is the thing, right? Players have always taken less to play here. And the reason was because they felt they had a chance to win. They were in the playoffs every year, whether you thought they were going to the cup or getting out in the second round, they were always going to be in the mix. You don't know if they're going to be in the mix after this season, given what Krejci does, given what Bergeron does, because as we've said so many times, who is going to be his center? Who? And this is the thing where you get to what can the Bruins promise Pastrnak in the future? You can promise him, we're going to have good goaltending, right? You probably have solid goaltending. You've got top six support on the wings. You're not, I guess relied upon to do all the scoring. You've got a legit number one defenseman in McAvoy. You got a legit number two in Hampus Lindholm. But when it comes to a center to play with, who? And that's where I think, again, he will. I think he does. He would want to re-sign for less in a normal Bruins market, but this isn't, because they don't have centers down the line for the future. Again, you can say, we think, Merkulov is going to potentially be a top six center, but you don't know that. You don't know that at all. And you can say, well, we're going to make a big splash in free agency. Well, that isn't really something you want to rely upon. So again, I do think he re-signs. I think he likes it too much here. I think he likes the culture. I think they think too highly of him. I don't think this will be a Torrey Krug situation, because I think Krug was a very good offensive left shot defenseman who was 30. It was it was a very different situation. He wanted to be here, but the Bruins ultimately didn't want him. The Bruins want David Pastrnak. That is not the issue here. So again, are they going to have to kind of go all out to say to Pastrnak, hey, these are, we plan on these being your centers? Are they going to roll out, 5-year plans of hey, we're going to make we're going to sign the biggest center next season. And what are they going to do?
Yeah, it's tough, because I think if you're Pastrnak, no matter what the Bruins can pitch or whatever, picture they want to paint in terms of what this team's going to look 3-4 years down the road, it's going to rely on Pastrnak, who has the leverage here, to kind of more or less take a leap of faith. Because again, it's not like they can just point and be like, we are going to sign such and such. Who knows that's going to happen? If you asked us last year if the Bruins are going to paint a picture in terms of what this team's going to look like in the future, I think we all would have said, well, they're going to get Hurdle, and they'll be all set. Of course, you can lay out the best laid, the most logical, the most favorable plan for how the Bruins can correct some of these flaws in their lineup, but then you get to real life and it never works out that way. If you implied logic, then Thomas Hurdle wouldn't have signed a long-term deal with a Sharks team that's going to be in no man's land for years.
Yeah, I don't think Thomas Hurdle cared much about winning a cup.
Right, exactly. So again, but when you just look at, you play a dangerous game in terms of, doing sweeping declarations of who you're going to sign, but it's more or less what the Bruins have to do right now, right? They can talk about the fact that Pastrnak, as you said, can be part of a core where they have pieces to build around. You still have McAvoy, Lindholm, Swayman. You can look at Lohrei and Lysell as guys that could be up by the NHL roster this year, could be impact guys in a year or two. But again, what's going to be the talent down the middle, right? And if you're the Bruins, all you can really kind of offer is, we still have a winning mindset. We're trying to retool on the fly. We're not going to tank or rebuild or anything like that and have those assurances. But that's kind of all you can really offer if you're the Bruins in terms of how to appease a guy like Pastrnak. And I think they've done enough to make him happy this year, right? You have David Krejci back, you have another Czech player in Pavel Zacha. But if you're Pastrnak, it's going to rely a lot on taking the Bruins at their word, that they can rebuild around this team and kind of retool on the fly, which again, easier said than done. You can look at the fact they got a lot of contracts coming off the books, but if let's say Pastrnak signs, I think for $9.5 million, if you add in the fact that the bonus overages for Bergeron and Krejci are going to carry over to next year, I think you're looking at about $11 million in cap space, and that's before you have to re-sign Swayman. You have to deal with what could be two major vacancies down the middle. You have some money, yes, but is it enough that all of a sudden you can go and drop, $10 million on one player, right? You could probably do that, but that's all you're doing. And you still have other holes to fill. They only have 4 forwards signed through next year. So,
good.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, you can look at what the talking points are in terms of how the Bruins can map out and paint a pretty picture in terms of what the future is, but it's going to require quite the undertaking for the Bruins just to retool and have a seamless kind of transition from the Bergeron era to the McAvoy, Pastrnak, whatever you want to paint, whatever you want to call it. So if you're Pastrnak, yeah, it's going to, I think, rely a lot on taking the Bruins at their word, which some risk involved there. When you look at maybe some other teams, if even a team like Florida or someone's going to be calling, who has the better 3, 4, 5 year plan, right? I think the Bruins still should be the favorite just in terms of the familiarity and all those things. But if Pasternak's basing his decision primarily on the future, the Bruins, the team that has the most concrete, set in stone plan for the years ahead, I don't think so.
It's interesting you mentioned the Pastrnak stuff. I think this is going to start some really uncomfortable truths about the future of the Bruins, at least in the next 5 years. And we've talked about this for a long time, and I think a lot of other media and some fans on Twitter certainly have said, what is the future down the middle? And that's kind of derailing their plans going forward. And I think now with Pastrnak kind of openly questioning it, at least through a source, and it being reported, that it's a concern of the players too, of guys being like, wait a second, what is your plan down the middle? Because again, we said, it's a good thing for them that Bergeron and Krejci returned, because you can kick that problem down the road one more year, as though you're getting an extension on a deadline, so to speak. But I look at this becoming a forefront issue. And I think even if and when he does sign, I still think there's going to be questions on that team of, well, who are the top two centers going to be? I think you're going to have, potentially wingers, guys like Taylor Hall and Marchand and whomever. Again, maybe they won't outwardly say it, but they're going to be thinking, who am I playing? Who's playing in between me and the other winger? And I think this is kind of getting the ball rolling on that, where it's now become a forefront issue. They've kind of pushed it off for all these years because they had Bergeron, but I mean, as we've said, if Bergeron was this close to retiring this offseason, what's next offseason going to bring? So I do think this is going to start a lot of uncomfortable stuff with the Pastrnak thing. And by the way, he might just be negotiating. He might just be trying to get the most money out of this thing. And, maybe he doesn't even care. I love Boston. I love the people there. So who knows? But speaking of this upcoming season, which is a little more, it's not more relevant, but it's, going to happen quicker potentially. Jim Montgomery offered up what he thought the top six will most likely look like. He did it in an interview with Steve Conroy, the Boston Herald, and then he also gave insight into it on WEEI. So no surprise here, at least for what we kind of predicted. It's Zacha, Bergeron, DeBrusk, and then Hall, Krejci, and Pastrnak. Are you surprised by any of this?
No, I don't think so. I think the one maybe question mark was going to be if Zacha is going to be up on that top line, and maybe could you have switched it around where maybe you put DeBrusk back at left wing on the Bergeron line, and maybe it's you slot up a guy like Craig Smith. If Fabian Lysell makes a push, maybe you do that. But I think this is the safest option. I think when you look at the fact that this lineup, how it's going to start on October, whatever it is, 11th, 12th, and what it's going to look like, hopefully by the end of the year, it's going to be very different in terms of guys moving all around the lineup with these injuries. So I think if you're Jim Montgomery, if you can keep the Hall, Krejci, and Pastrnak line together, might as well start it now and commit to it. And if it works out, works right off the bat, that's great. Because as much as I think you still look at a top line of Bergeron, DeBrusk, Zacha, probably going to be good. Like you still have Bergeron down the middle. It's probably going to be a very solid line. But let's say they, start slow, that need some time to gel. At the very least, you have a line that should be able to take some of that scoring pressure off of them in Hall, Krejci, and Pastrnak. Like I don't think that line necessarily needs a whole lot of time to adjust to one another. You got Pastrnak, who has played with Krejci before. You look at the great numbers that Hall and Krejci had during their limited time together. I think Boston outscored teams 14-1 when they were on the ice together during that stretch last season, 2 years ago, rather. So the second line, the way that's set up isn't really that much of a surprise. I think it all just came down to how they wanted to deploy Zacha. And if you're the Bruins and you've signed Zacha to a 1-year deal, you kind of know what you have in him in terms of a guy that can give you 35 points, but maybe you want to see if there's a higher ceiling. Why not kind of learn right off the bat, right? Like throw him kind of into the fire, have him next to another guy in Bergeron. I think Montgomery said on WEI, it can only help a guy like Zacha to have, steady reps with a guy like Bergeron to kind of learn the Bruin way, I think is what Montgomery said. So, and if it works out great, that's awesome. You got a guy that can, slot in for Marchand for the time being. And if it gets Zacha rolling and comfortable early on, even if you have to move him down the lineup later on in the day when Marchand comes back, you still have a guy that's engaged, that's playing well, that's confident. So in terms of the initial look, and we'll see how it changes from what Montgomery says in late August to how it is on the ice in a few weeks. Seems like a good way to kind of get the ball rolling in terms of the way the lineup's going to shake out.
Yeah, I mean, my only, surprise to it would be Fabian Lysell. I get it. He's not going to come out and say like, oh yeah, Fabian Lysell is going to be our starting right winger next to Bergeron. I know that, but there is that party that's like, wonder, because again, I don't think they're nixing that opportunity. And by the way, I still think Providence is the way to go with him. I'm not saying that he should be in there, but it is interesting that he kind of was not considered more in that statement. But I do think, again, Providence is the move, and I think they want to put him in Providence unless he comes out of training camp and he's just absolutely insane. But yeah, I mean, again, we've said all along, and for a guy like Zacha, why not set him up for success? Like, what better way to start off than just, here's Patrice Bergeron. Enjoy it. Most NHL players would kill for that. So enjoy it, so to speak. But as the offseason rolls along, Conor, what can the people look forward to from you over at Boston Sports Journal?
Yeah, we continuing to kind of plug away at the final weeks of the slow portion of the off season. We'll have some couple of interviews we're excited to share in the next couple of days over at BSJ. We'll have more camp preview stuff coming out in the coming weeks as well. So you can find all that stuff over at bostonsportsjournal.com. So please subscribe over at BSJ. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can do that at ConorRyan_93.
Go do all that. That's Conor Ryan. I'm Evan Marinofsky, Book the Bear listeners. Have a great rest of your week.